Okay, it is 2 p.m. Alaska time, September 6th, 2022. This is a regular assembly meeting of the Petersburg Borough Assembly. Will the clerk please call the roll?
David,
Here.
Mark,
Here.
Bob,
Here.
Jeff, Jay,
Excused?
Thomas,
Here.
Chelsea. Here.
Okay, it is now time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, bear with me here. I'm using my phone for the agenda, but I think it should go fairly smoothly. And if things go awry here for some reason, I think Member Lynn will probably be the appropriate person to take over the meeting. With that being said, item 3 on today's agenda, there will be no swearing in of Officer Kirby today. That will be done at a later point. So item 4 on the agenda is we need a motion for approval of the minutes from August 15th, 2022.
So move.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those meeting minutes have been approved. Next item is amendment and approval of the meeting agenda before us today. If there are no amendments, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll move forward with today's agenda as it has been presented to us. There are no public hearings today. Item 6, no bid awards. That brings us to item 8, persons to be heard related to items on today's agenda. Clerk Thompson, is there anybody in the audience or zoomed in that or called in that would like to participate?
I believe we have the members of the audience, Mayor Jensen.
Okay, anyone in the audience like to participate today under persons to be heard?
Yes, thank you. My name is Catherine Kowalski, and I'm here to represent myself today, and I have some issues regarding ordinance 102211. I did go back in the minutes and listen to some of the videos, and there were some questions that I felt didn't get addressed, and I would like to know the answers to these. So the first one is some of these requests for items and departments above and beyond what has already been budgeted. Is it a rare thing that takes place, or does this open up more opportunities for the departments to expand? And in saying that, when budgets are usually made, you usually go by what has been spent before and then base it upon that. What prevents this from these departments from expanding further? And if you have any questions later for me, I'd be happy to give you an example. The other one is, are there caps? It sounds like the manager can go up to $75,000. Can that department go back at any time in the year and request more? What stops that? What prevents that from happening? And then I guess my third question is, what prevents management from, I hate to use the word discriminating against departments, but suppose the manager has departments he prefers and budgets or allows more budgetary funds for those departments over others. If you have any questions, if you need me to clarify anything or give you an example, I'd be happy to. Otherwise, thank you for your time.
Any concerns of Mrs. Kowalski's concerns? Any questions? Okay, thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience that would like to participate in persons to be heard related to items on the agenda today?
It does not look like it, Mayor Jensen, and I also do not have anyone online asking to participate.
Okay, then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, persons to be heard unrelated to items on today's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience today that would like to speak on items not on today's agenda?
There's not, Mayor Jensen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I can't see that direction. So we'll move on to the next Agenda item 10, boards, commission, and committee reports. There are none today. Report of other officers. We have a report from the Petersburg Medical Center CEO, Mr. Hofstetter. Will you please give us your update?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon. Phil Hofstetter, Petersburg Medical Center CEO. Few updates related to PMC. Under finance, we are preparing for our annual audit and our cost report for the year. As you know, our COVID situation has been pretty difficult and challenging financially, and so we're in a recovery. Certainly this budget year, we're maintaining and monitoring the situation on a monthly basis through our finance committee and our board. So we are, I want to commend our staff. We are working very diligently on our census and occupancy rate within the facility, which has been pretty, now pretty hard to meet the needs. So under items related to workforce, we are also very fortunate to have a strong workforce. We had a lot of attrition in the past couple of years, similar to other facilities. However, we don't have the challenge of a lot of the locum staffing, locum providers, contract nurses. We have some, but definitely nothing compared to other facilities. We feel very fortunate with that. We are very strong. Along those lines, I want to commend our nursing leadership for starting another cohort through the UAA program for the RNs. We have 2 students within that program. We also are working with the school for the CNA program this year, and we have our staff are teaching those programs, and we have a few new students under that as well. So very good, strong relationships with the school and developing our cohorts within the facility. Along those lines, we have 3 new providers within PMC, and that's also to meet the needs within the clinic. We have Dr. Tasillo, who's retiring at the end of October. We recently had Angela Manish, who most everyone knows in the community, has become a nurse practitioner, which is a provider, and now is moving from nursing into clinical care in the clinic as a primary care practitioner. And we also have 2 new providers, Dr. Hulebeck, Alice Hulebeck, and Eric Hulebeck, a PA. They were on the radio last week under PMC, under the KFSK Live, and also introducing them into the community. So again, we have significant backlogs and wait times for our community members, and we're trying to, as we come out of recovery with COVID, we're trying to meet that need, and we're certainly building up our staffing. And so we're very, very fortunate to have the opportunity for those staff to join us. On the outreach side, we're working with the public health nurse, Erin, and her team to put on a community point of dispensing, which is called a community pod for the Omicron vaccine. We're tentatively scheduling that September 23rd, 10 to 3 in the community gym. Anyone who wants to have a vaccine, it's more of a walk-in style as opposed to scheduling. So we will have more information and get the promotion out there. We are working closely with the school to meet some of the needs we made available with our more access to providers to meet the needs in the community for our physicals. So we're working closely with the school. We're also developing some opportunities for screening in the school, including vision and hearing, and more interaction with our providers to facilitate and work with the school. We also, again, signed a contract with the school for behavioral health needs. So still building those out. We don't have information on flu shots yet. So we're still waiting. Ideally, we'd love to have added flu shots to the Omicron vaccine clinic, but we are still pending that from the state. So we're not sure the situation of that. Under a new facility item, we did have the geotech environmental work done earlier this summer. We're still waiting for the full report on that. Tentatively, the big thing is, how much muskeg is in those digs, and it seems like it's roughly, or again, this is not final, so I want to be cautious in this interpretation. I'm hearing roughly around 7 to 12 feet, which is, my understanding, not terrible on those 2 locations. So more to come on that. Preliminary steps are promising. We're currently scoring and going through the RFP process through our committee, and we'll have more information as far as the full board approval for the architect firm going forward. And that's all I have.
Okay, any questions of Mr. Hofstadter today by any assembly member? Member Tremblay?
Thank you. Just because on our agenda includes a discussion about hiring Michelle Lopez and the further discussion about assisted living, is that something you wanted to touch on now, or should we wait for a more comprehensive update later?
I wasn't sure if you were having that discussion today. My understanding, we're just moving forward with those discussions, working with Steve on that. That's certainly, we know it's a long-term process. We want to make sure we touch all the bases, and we want to do carefully, but certainly supportive of working together on that. It makes sense. You know, as we come out of sort of the recovery, looking at things that make sense within the community for scaling, for operations, and working collaboratively is very, very much in line with what we want to be able to do to assist them. Yeah.
Yes,
It
I guess
seems
let us
like
know. Just, yeah, I guess if you hear us talking about it later,
Do you
give us
I guess that's
questions,
a
yeah.
question for me because I wasn't sure. I have another meeting I would attend to. Do you need me to stay for that?
If I understand the agenda,
Okay.
we're just gonna vote to whether to approve the manager's request, right, on Ms. Lopez for that. Is that right, Manager Giesbrecht? Can you hear me at all?
Now I can, yeah.
Volume is,
Working. No. Sorry about that. My mic was not working. So, no, I did not hear what you said, sir.
well, I believe if I heard Member Tremblay right, she was talking about the approval of your recommendation for Lopez.
Yes, for elderly housing, and I can
Okay.
speak to that when we get to that point. And no, Phil, I can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So any other questions of Mr. Hofstadter? Okay, thank you, Phil, for your report today, and we will move on to the next presentation, and that is from U.S. Forest Service District Ranger Bourne. Will you please fill us in on the latest and greatest around Petersburg?
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Members of the Assembly. I'm Ray Bourne, the District Ranger here in Petersburg. 3 months on the ground now and another couple of days, so learning a lot pretty quickly. A couple things to update you on. Trails, of course, is always of big interest to everybody. They finished the Ideal Cove Trail. It's very, very nice. It's gravel, concrete steps are all only about 6 inches high. So us old guys don't have to step so much going down there. It's really beautiful to do that. Crane Lake Trail is also being worked on and being improved upon, and moving out some of the boardwalk areas and adding gravel into that to improve that trail as well. So that's doing well. Golden Creek Trail has been completed. They did a restoration on that as gravel. It's really a great trail again, one more time. And finally, man-made hole bridges have got netting on them. They've been pretty slippery the last couple of years. And I talked to some of the crews, hey, can we take care of that this year? And they just wrapped it up last week. So that's kind of some good news on the trails. Kind of a bigger project further down the road, Petersburg Lake Trail. That's on our Great American Outdoors Act program starting next year. For 3 years of restoration on that trail and a cabin up there. So a lot of work will start on that next year. So kind of a bigger Great American Outdoors Act project they're working on with the trails in the area. On timber, there was a question last time I was here about the young growth sales, the feasibility of that. And I sent to you in the packet today kind of a Lower Falls Creek excerpt from there. It kind of explained how that looks like, what that looks like on that sale. It's basically 2 units, about 41 acres, give or take. And it comes out to being about, what was the total value on that? Somewhere of $32,000 of value to that. And again, it adds jobs to the local economy and a whole bunch of value like that. So that's kind of in there for your information, as well as the links to where they're at on the webpage for the full report, if you want to take a look into that further. So part of our requirement for any of our sales, they have to be economically feasible. So that's part of our analysis and all of that. As we're working on Thomas Bay, that's kind of our next big step forward. We're still doing the analysis and developing those alternatives and things like that. And we'll move forward with that sometime next year. I have staff out there looking at right now, like, okay, how can we do this? And some of the intent of these young growth sales to make it feasible for a long term, i.e. the lifespan of that stand of trees. So theoretically, you'd be able to basically continually harvest it for the next 60 to 80 years. And at the end of that cycle, you can go back to unit 1 and start over again. So sustain that over a long period of time. Again, jobs for a long period of time for people in local areas, kind of the intent of that. So we're still analyzing, but that's the direction we're headed right now on that. We also have, of course, Midcoff Island small sales ongoing currently. We have about 3 units going on right now. It's typically 8 to 30 trees, give or take, individually selected, cruised by our folks, approved or not. And then we actually go ahead and let the small operators cut those trees and then use them to mill them locally. And that's kind of the intent of that. We also have something going on like that on cake as well. So there's 2 sales going on in the cake area on Kupanoff Island as well. So that's kind of going along there as that process there. We're working on the cake access road, looking at that salvage sales there. We counted the trees last week, about 941 of them alongside the road there. So we're figuring out how to best utilize that timber. Some of it for firewood, maybe some of it for salvage sale. I was talking with my timber crew today saying, okay, what's the best way to approach this? Turns out there's a lot of lumber out there. So we're figuring out what the best way to do is to share that. So kind of, we're looking at right now, some of it being for firewood purposes, some of it being for a small sale, relatively small sale anyway. So that's moving forward with that. On the timber side, Dr. Liz Graham, our Forest Service entomologist, was here and talked about spruce budworm a couple weeks ago. She sent me a report, and basically that this is a natural event, is what she said. And that basically that we're seeing disease now in those particular caterpillars, so they're dying off. So it's going to go down. Anything that's got some green on it will probably recover. So of course, from the forester side, that's a great thinning opportunity. You know, we're thinning and giving some more shade, but also it's salvage sale opportunity there. So we'll look at that over time as to how that comes together. But we suspect a lot of that will actually recover. So that's probably everything else on timber. Any questions about trails or timber? Okay. Facility consolidation has been moving forward. Kind of the intent is to remove all the asbestos in that old post office building. So all of my staff will move out of there in a couple of years down to the Harris building. I work from home, and then they'll renovate that facility, and then we'll move back into it, including all the people from the Harris building, move to the downtown location. So we'll have everybody centralized in one location. A bunch of benefits for us, quite frankly, it cuts down our costs, you know, having multiple facilities out and things like that. And we're also going to, because we've now turned the nursery over to the university again, we're going to build a small maintenance facility, about 4,000 square feet, up at the Fram site. And basically we'll take out the old bunkhouses that we can no longer maintain and put in a small facility right there to do maintenance. Again, cuts down on our transportation costs and do that. I look at all the zoning. The zoning's appropriate for that up there. So, okay, we're good with that. Figuring that how we're going forward with that. So the first work probably won't happen until 2024 right now. It looks like we'll start doing any kind of demolition work. We're starting to shift staffing a little bit already, moving a couple people down to the Harris building, starting to move out and close down those older buildings at the Fram seat that we're going to demolish at some point in time. So that's kind of the way forward. Kind of a side note on that, but important to the community. We've looked at the hiring process we do for our temporary seasonals. It's really expensive. We found out it's less expensive to hire them permanently than it is to hire them on a temporary seasonal basis. So this year we did hard look at our organizational chart and said, okay, what are these seasonal positions? Let's add them to our org chart. Let's make them permanent seasonal positions. So we're going through that process right now. For Petersburg, that's a lot more people, basically, quite frankly. We're talking 15 to 20 more people here for the Petersburg Ranger District that will actually bring in a seasonal capacity, but again, it'll be a permanent situation for them. And it looks like it's a better economic thing. It's more reliability for our people that work with us. So again, kind of a moving forward. We're still working through that process, but some of the good news coming forward with that. A couple of committees coming up, Resource Advisory Committee. It's something that's been kind of quiet for the last couple of years. What happened is the Tongass consolidated all those and broke them into South Zone and North Zone. We're still waiting on secretarial approval for those nominations. So once that happens, then we'll be able to restart that Resource Advisory Committee to use those funds that have been set aside for those activities. And then the Southeast Regional Advisory Committee, the SERAC, We'll be meeting October 25th to 27th in Ketchikan, and that's just talking about the federally subsistence type activities. So any interest in that, please let me know about that. That's all I have for today. Any questions for me?
Assembly have any questions today? Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you. So when you renovate the old post office building to take the asbestos out, where will your current employees go and how long will that process take?
So our current employees, the plan is that we'll either revert back to telework, you know, for a lot of people, or they'll go down to Harris Building, work out the Harris Building. And once the building's here, we'll shift from the Harris Building forward and then we'll do renovations on the Harris Building, moving it more to storage and taking it out of being an active office location. Again, we're looking at the cost of doing business. Running internet to that building is really expensive.
Thank you.
Member Tremblay?
Thank you. On that note, just thinking of summer visitors and the role that the Forest Service plays in facilitating that, do you see any room where folks from Forest Service, like front admin, kind of welcome side, would work with the visitor building, the Chamber of Commerce, to staff, just as far as having footprint in town, you know, that could be a couple years of not being accessible.
Right, yeah, that's probably a really good point. I think we already have an agreement, we're working on a new agreement with the visitor center to you know, support them and do things like that. And maybe that's a good choice, is just to have one of our people sit there. I mean, that makes sense. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Member Fine Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask you to please just clarify. I didn't really understand what you mean by permanent seasonals. Is it someone who comes seasonally every year, or what does that mean? What does it look
Okay,
like?
what that means is the person's a permanent person working for the federal government. So I give them some higher benefits for, you know, less competition for hiring. And the typical is what's called 13 and 13. 13 pay periods on, 13 pay periods off, 6 months and 6 months. Or 18 and 8, which is, you know, 18 pay periods on, 8 off, which is basically 9 months on, 3 months off. And that's just kind of generally speaking what that looks like. You know, the benefit is real flexible. That's where I started, quite frankly. So when I had to go back to college, you said, you know what, we're not gonna make you stay for your full 13 pay periods. You can go back to college. I'm like, okay, thank you very much. But again, I came back and worked permanently then. So we do that with a lot of our students. What we see in the temporary people is they don't have that benefit of having less competition for hiring a permanent full-time job. Many of our seasonals will do that, is they'll rotate into a permanent full-time job, which is what we want them to do, quite frankly. This is kind of that growth area for them. So we can actually start them at a lower grade level. If they have a college, they've been in college, we can start them at that lower pay level. And over the years, while they're going through school and stuff, we can promote them to higher levels. And then when they finish school, then they're really ready to jump right into a permanent full-time job if they so choose to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your update to us
Thank
today.
you, Mayor.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the mayor's report. Let me bring it up here. We have an election coming up October 4th, 2022. The absentee voting for this year's municipal election will take place in the training room of the municipal building beginning Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. Those hours will be between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. weekdays. Absentee voting will end at 12 noon on October 3rd, 2022. The polls will open on October 4th, 2022 in the activity room of the community center from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. For more information regarding the election, check out the 2022 election page of the borough's website or contact Clerk Thompson at 907-772-5405 or dthompson@petersburgak.gov. A link to the election page is attached to this report. Next, we are seeking letters of interest for a housing task force. The Petersburg Borough is accepting letters of interest from citizens who wish to serve the community by joining a task force to research the housing problem in Petersburg. Citizens from the following groups are needed: lot developers, road builders, land surveyors, building contractors, engineers, real estate agents, Petersburg Economic Development Council, Share Coalition, Petersburg Indian Association, Petersburg Medical Center, Petersburg School District, Petersburg Borough Assembly, and from the public at large. the assembly shall appoint the members to this task force at the October 3rd, 2022 assembly meeting. Letters of interest should be sent to Clerk Thompson at the Borough office located at 12 South Nordic Drive, or by sending to Box 329, Petersburg, Alaska, or by emailing to dthompson@petersburgak.gov. And with that being said, that's all in the mayor's report. So we'll open it up to Manager Giesbrick for his report.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the 2022 youth basketball season is now open for registration. Register online or see the front desk at Parks and Rec for assistance, including as a new pre-K session. Parks and Rec is hosting a referee clinic on Wednesday, September 7th from 7 to 8 p.m. Please meet at the community gym if interested in participating in this year's season. Parks and Rec also has their new fall season schedule available, which includes an evening water aerobic session on Monday nights. Schedules can be seen on Facebook and on the Parks and Rec website. Our triathlon club is hosting a triathlon on September 24th at 9 a.m. Saturday. See Scott Burt for more details if you want to ever try to run a triathlon. So good luck. The borough's annual financial audit is scheduled for the week of September 12th. The audit will be conducted by BDO USA, who's been our auditor for some time. Petersburg Community Jail contract was increased from $173,626 to $369,484. This is an increase of $195,858 to the contract. And this increase to the jail contract covers the additional police dispatcher funding that was approved by the Assembly this budget year. So thanks to our legislators and the governor for pushing that through. The streets crew removed an old manhole and installed a new sewer service lateral for a property on South Nordic Drive. And we have got through our kind of overcrowding, and the impounded vehicles at our impound lot have been hauled off to the landfill for disposal. And we're working with the harbor to make sure that impounded vehicles get moved over to the impound area. Have not yet gone back out to Pack East to see if DNR has done anything with some of the vehicles out there, but we'll be checking on that this week. A FEMA representative was on site on August 30th to perform the final inspection of the Public Works culvert replacement project. Project is now approved for closeout. Our crews replaced 21 deck planks on the Rasmussen Bridge. Full deck replacement is needed pretty soon. It was last done in 2014. Our garbage bear complaints have decreased dramatically in the last couple of weeks. We attribute this to community doing a much better job of keeping garbage secured. And so hopefully the bears will find food sources elsewhere and stay out of town. Thanks to the Petersburg Police Department for their efforts in educating the public about the importance of keeping garbage secured. Our maintenance techs, Jim Holder and Sam Jackson, have wrapped up maintenance at the museum. For the time being, we're still hoping to get some new gutters installed before the winter season. There's also some additional siding to replace next spring. It's a building that is nearing its end of its useful life, so it's on our conversation list. After a couple of delays, a technician from Allegreza Door Company finally was able to visit Petersburg last week to inspect and evaluate the borough's bay doors in several locations. The Baylor Public Works Garage, the police department, and fire department bay doors were inspected, adjusted, and evaluated to determine if any required replacement. All doors were found to be in serviceable condition. Community Development Department is continuing to clear out our residential building plans from past projects. Homeowners will either receive their plans in the mail or receive a letter explaining where to pick up their house plans. We would appreciate it if homeowners would let us know if they do not want their plans back so we can dispose of them. Molly met with the Alaska Broadband Office to discuss their data needs as they attempt to document access and service level throughout the state. Per the discussion, the federal efforts to map broadband access have largely been based on census tract data, which is not usually detailed enough nor accurate enough in rural areas. Hopefully, we'll be able to review and provide supplemental data for the borough. Liz met with a new planner from Dillingham to discuss the minor lot consolidation process that we use here in Petersburg. Dillingham's looking at the pros and cons of adopting a similar ordinance. In August, the library offered a pilot program for Sea Alaska Heritage Institute's Baby Raven Reads program. 3 story times were offered that featured Tlingit culture and language. Jeanette Ness was our cultural specialist, and local elders Deborah O'Gara, Marianne Rainey, and Mary Katas Miller and Karen McCullough contributed to the program. Nearly 40 community members participated in the storytime events. This program will now be expanded to 12 additional communities and libraries in Southeast Alaska. Our slowdown in the harbor to summer traffic has allowed staff to concentrate on annual maintenance projects like cleaning the underside of the floats, water line and fire lines, and power washing the launch ramp and float cleaning stations, mucking out the grids and power washing the grid vents. Water Department received ADEC approval for a change in plan to accomplish the storage tank piping project. We will install a vented blind on the upstream side of the existing valve, double up on the cross connection protections as required by ADEC. A concrete vault will be constructed to allow easy access if the blind must be removed and the valve operated in the event of failure at the storage tank. Cabin Creek and City Creek Dam periodic safety inspections are scheduled for September. And Carl and his crew have located a used tub grinder in Tok, Alaska, and are working with the owner to negotiate a price within our budget. The unit was shown to staff through a FaceTime call and appears to be in great shape with only a few minor issues to address. The Blind Slough Hydro project continues to progress towards bidding. McMillan Jacobs is working towards 95% plans and would like to get the project out on the street by September 16th. Thanks to the police department for investigating a theft of utility services at a location in the Scout Bay area. And Carl is working on a presentation of the Scout Bay generation project for the assembly and hopes to have it ready by our next meeting in September. And Power and Light has prepared estimates for extending electrical system through the various subdivisions that are being considered for development as we talk about housing. And that's it on my report, unless there's questions.
Any questions of the manager today on his report? Okay, thank you, Manager Giesbrecht. That brings us on. Member Kinsinger, do you have a question?
Yes, Steve, I know there was discussion about also utilizing the dump as an impoundment yard. Have you made any progress on that or any thoughts?
Not yet. We are trying to make sure that we've got adequate camera coverage and that we can put fences up in a way that keeps that stuff safe. When a vehicle is impounded, we are responsible for it and anything in it. And so we're trying to work with PIA, who has a junk car removal program that they're trying to get lined up. And we're also working with the PD as they've been getting more staffed up on how many cars can we actually have impounded. And maybe our impound lot is a good enough size if we stay on top of all the paperwork. So we're all working with everybody and at the same time trying to get questions answered on what are our requirements going to be if we decide to move the impound yard up there. So we're heading in good directions. There's a lot of moving parts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions of the manager before we move on the agenda? Okay, thank you, Steve. That brings us to unfinished business. The one item on unfinished business today is ordinance 2022-11. This is an ordinance amending chapter 4.04 entitled Purchasing of the Petersburg Municipal Code to increase purchasing authorization limits for administrative officers of the borough and the borough manager, and to amend exceptions to bidding. This is the third and final reading. If this ordinance is approved today in its third and final reading, it will increase the purchasing authorization limits from $30,000 to $75,000 for the borough manager, and will provide the borough manager authority to establish individual authorized purchasing limits for the borough's administrative officers. This is subject to the limitations of the Petersburg Municipal Code 4.04, 02, 0B, and C. In addition, in this ordinance, that will be amended to increase the exception to competitive bidding for purchases costing $30,000 or more to $75,000 or more but not less than $150,000, and this will be upon assembly resolution. I'd entertain a motion to approve ordinance 2022-11 in its third and final reading.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made by member Mucci, seconded by member Tremblay. Any discussion? Member Tremblay.
Thank you. I just thought we could go through some of the questions posed by the public. I'm sure some of them will be kind of hard to answer. For example, the first question, would it be uncommon for requests above this number? Partly why we have to raise the limit is because it's been 20 years. And so costs have, since we have changed that limit, so costs have changed. So do you anticipate how common do you think it'll be for a request over $75,000 to come to you that is not already budgeted for?
Pretty uncommon, actually. Or when we hit 75,000 or that kind of range, we're talking about project expenses. So it's not just we're buying, some pipe or something. It generally is a big project, which is going to be budgeted and has to be. And again, just to try to remind everybody, the increase in signing does not mean that we can change the budget. The budget has to be approved by the assembly. That's locked in unless it's changed by the assembly. So no change that this does will affect that aspect of it. If it's not a budgeted expense, it doesn't matter what the dollar amount is, I can't sign it.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to address the question about if a department felt that they weren't getting due process in consideration for expenses, what would the remedy be to that? Would it be to come to the assembly with their complaints if they felt that the manager was, if you or future managers were not doing that appropriately? What would that step be?
It would be the assembly, but I would hope that never happens. I think I can't speak for member Kinzinger who wanted, that was, having it different by different departments. But the logic there would have nothing to do with the department head other than a brand new department head might need more supervision than somebody who's been here a long time. But it also varies on departments. I mean, I trust Tara without a shadow of a doubt, yet her expenses don't need to be too much higher because we don't spend that kind of money at the library. Carl, I trust totally, and his expenses are often extremely high because the cost of what he does is very high. So a lot of those limits are going to be set by, some of it's tenure, but most of it's going to be set because that particular department has higher need. They spend money at a higher level because what they do is just more expensive.
Thank you.
Member Kinzinger, you had your hand up?
Those were my two questions that I had. I just wanted to emphasize that to the public that by passing this doesn't mean that a department head or the manager can spend this amount of money unless it's specifically budgeted by the assembly. In other words, Steve can't just say, well, I like this new car and I think I'm going to buy it. He can't do that. He's got to, unless it's in the budget. So that's not an issue that we're dealing with here. So it's only budgeted expenses. And my thoughts on the department heads and why I wanted those changes was just to streamline things. As the manager pointed out, different departments have different spending needs. And also, also whatever the manager's comfort level is with that individual department head, depending upon their experience. So it's not designed to be discriminatory towards any department.
Any other input by the assembly before we call for the vote? Yeah, I looked into this a little bit today. I was not there for the first two readings of this ordinance, but being that any expenditure would have to be budgeted prior to this, it just ups the spending limits. So it'll still be something that will be addressed by the assembly in the three readings of the annual budget process. So if there's no other input by assembly members, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Bob, Jeff.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the ordinance 2022-12 passes or 11 passes unanimously. Now on to new business. This is an ordinance amending provisions of Title 17 of the Petersburg Municipal Code entitled Safety Zone Adoptions and the Title 19 of the Petersburg Municipal Code entitled Zoning to address tiny house dwellings, detached accessory dwellings, and multiple buildings on a single lot. If adopted in 3 readings, this ordinance will establish standards to allow for tiny house dwellings, detached accessory dwellings, and multiple buildings on a single lot. This is only applicable within the service area 1. Entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 2022-12 in its first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made with a second. Discussion. Member Fine Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I brought this forward. Everybody knows that housing is a major problem here in the community, and we're all trying to address it. And I think there are a number of things the borough and the assembly and the private sector can do. It's a multifaceted problem, and I think this is one of the ways the assembly can help right now. There are some ways we can update our code. Essentially, these are minor updates to the existing code to bring us closer to international standards. These have been run by by Liz Cabrera and the borough attorney, so everything is copacetic. We know they all work. And this code update effectively accomplishes 3 things. Makes tiny house dwellings a possibility under our code by adopting the 2018 International Code Council Appendix Q, which basically provides standards for tiny houses so that we know if tiny houses are being built in Petersburg, they're being built up to code. It allows for detached accessory dwellings. Currently, a detached accessory dwelling in Petersburg needs to be connected by a breezeway. This makes that no longer a requirement, so it opens up a lot of possibilities for creative uses of lots. And that's something we've been hearing from a lot of people. They want it to be easier to do ADUs, and I think it's a great way to provide a little bit more flexible housing in the community. Finally, this will allow us to create multifamily housing on lots that do not necessarily need to be attached into a single building. Currently, you can have a multifamily lot, but it needs to be in a single building. This update would allow us to have a cottage style development where there were multiple detached buildings on the same lot, which oftentimes I believe is much more aesthetically pleasing and also generally nicer for the residents. So that's what this does. I believe that these changes will encourage the private sector to, do some of the heavy lifting here, because the assembly and the borough can't do everything. We can't, solve the housing problem in Petersburg, but there are ways we can kind of facilitate the process for the people who do have the tools. I think this is one of them. So with that said, I hope everyone will look favorably on this and we can get it done and help people here. Thanks.
Any other input by assembly members? Member Lynn?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we could, if Liz would address how this fits into the revisions of the housing code and what her thought is in terms of what difference these particular provisions would make would help, I think.
Through the mayor, make sure I understand your question. The revision, you mean on the development code that was done several years ago?
The 3 provisions that are here as they relate to the revision of the code, which has not gone through.
So they're pulled directly out of that revision. And it's really the 3 components that I think would most affect housing in terms of providing the most flexibility to add new housing options for the borough. And then part 2 of the question was, I'm sorry, what was part 2?
What difference do you think this will make in terms of for our community?
So a couple of things. One, when you're trying to add housing options, you're looking at providing things that maybe aren't cookie cutter, aren't already out there. So this would just increase flexibility to property owners. So someone might want to have, has a home already, they want to add an income producing property, a small apartment. You know, usually we can accommodate that through a house attached, a small house attached to their existing house or converting a garage or something. But sometimes that's really not what the property owner wants to do. They would like to detach the house. And so that just adds like a new level of flexibility for the property owner. In terms of tiny houses, there is no necessarily a prohibition against tiny houses, but it's very difficult for them to meet our existing building code. So this provision adds some exceptions to that, especially if you're going to have a loft built into that tiny house. So again, another more flexibility for a housing option, you know, presumably a lower cost option. And then the third one, the code only envisions multifamily housing being in one big building. And, you know, we've had different property owners approach us about doing something more like a cottage cluster or just having separate buildings on multifamily. And try as I might, have not been able to get that round peg into the square hole to make that happen. And so this gives someone who owns multifamily housing, which is fairly rare zoning district in the borough, just more options on how they would like to develop that. You know, you don't have to just make the one big building. You can be a little bit more creative and maybe satisfy the needs of the market better by having this flexibility.
Thank you.
Member Tremblay?
Thank you. And thank you, Liz, for answering Bob's questions. Those were ones I was going to have. I think more flexibility for property owners in town is great. I'm a little concerned that, you know, Sitka passed something like this, but they did not include any structures in their plan that would include guidance regarding short-term rentals. And so they are now doing that retroactively. So I'm interested in future amendment on the second reading. I'm planning on voting yes for this. In the second reading, I would like to see an amendment that would try to meet that problem before we get ourselves in the middle of it, just because it would be a bummer to see something like a multifamily zoned property, say, get established with cottages that then became all short-term rentals instead of actually meeting the housing need of the community. So thank you for Liz for all the work that's been done on this, and hopefully this will encourage us to do more work on the broader zoning questions facing the borough. And thank you to Member Feinwalsh for bringing it forward.
Member Kinsinger and then Member Mucci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm in support of this. This is when I was on planning and zoning, these are the revisions that we put forward for the code. And I think just for clarification, the assembly actually passed that, but we didn't approve the map, which is the final step of it. So the assembly has at a previous point in the past, and I don't remember when it was, Liz, I know it's been a couple of years ago, we actually passed these very revisions. So I'm glad we're finally getting around to implementing them. I think anything we can do to increase the housing stock in town is definitely needed. So thanks.
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, I think this is a great idea. The housing issue in Petersburg is not going to be solved by one big answer. I think little steps like this ordinance that we're talking about, providing more flexibility with builders and stuff. I think it's a great idea. So yep, I think it's a good move forward and I will be supporting it.
Okay, if there are no other comments on the first reading of ordinance 2022-12, as well as Member Tremblay, I'm looking forward to public input, you know, during the public hearing process at the next meeting. If anybody has any concerns, that would be the time to bring it up, but there will also be a third reading 2 weeks later. So with that being said, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Chelsea,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Thomas, Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Okay, that ordinance passes unanimously in its first reading. That brings us to item B under new business. This is a resolution. It's 2022-12. A resolution approving the expenditure of up to $27,000 from the American Rescue Plan Special Revenue Fund 287 for a digital fingerprint scanning system. If approved, the borough will purchase a digital fingerprint scanning system using the ARPA funds. A digital fingerprinting system will greatly improve the quality of fingerprints taken, speed up the process, and reduce workload. A digital fingerprinting system will benefit many local individuals and businesses. I'd entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2022-12.
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made with a second. Discussion. Member Tremblay.
Thank you. Since I'm the one who brought it forward, thought I'd give some context as to how this got brought forward at this time. The issue of fingerprinting, as you can see in the resolution, and Chief Kerr will speak to this when I'm done, is a slow, inky process, physically inky process right now. And this came to it's something that I've never had to think much about, just given, I guess, my life. But in the early childhood education task force, it came up in all three of the meetings with the kind of subgroups we've created as a very huge issue, as a barrier for their hiring process, because you do have to go in, figure it out when the time will work for you, get the physical printing done, and then sending it off. And it could be weeks and weeks, and then you find out that the samples you sent in, even if you sent in more than one, wouldn't be read, and then you have to go through the whole process again. So that is a huge barrier for that specific industry, but there's more barriers as discussed within the resolution. So I'm hoping that we can pass this and get us launched a little bit into the future. And so if either the manager or the chief want to touch on it, or if you have questions for them, they're the ones to really answer them. But I'm excited to hear discussion if there is any.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. I can speak on it really quick. One of the benefits for this is it really will speed up the hiring process for local businesses. It'll help the borough, it helps the daycares, it helps anyone who needs a background check as far as fingerprinting. There's quite a few times they'll come in, they'll get 1 or 2 cards, and then we'll roll their fingerprints, and then they'll come back in a couple weeks and tell us that they weren't any good. The new machine will roll it and we'll capture that print, and it'll tell us right then and there if it's good or not. And then if we keep on rolling that print and that's the best we can get, we can actually indicate that on there, that this is the best and final. And so we won't be getting those return prints. This will also speed up the internal process with fingerprints. Currently, every time we have to fingerprint someone who's been arrested, they'll get 3 fingerprint cards. And then we also have to mail those things off. And as far as this machine will allow us to roll them once and then upload them directly to the state. So it takes out the man process of, or the manned process of processing them and sending them up to the state. If we ever have anyone who is lying to us about who they are, and we've had that in the past, where we get notified a couple of weeks later that the person wasn't who they were and that they're this person, then it's a huge process to notify the previous person, go through, get all that stuff withdrawn from the state, all the criminal stuff, and then get it recharged the other way. This thing will come back within an hour or two of whether or not it's that person or not. So this thing will definitely help out. We've been seeing a lot more increases for foster care, where people are trying to foster children in the community, and they come in and they get fingerprinted, and currently that process is so slow. Based on the fingerprinting process of having to wait for them to come back. This thing will be able to fingerprint them, and we can't upload them because those businesses don't take it, but at least we know that they're acceptable prints at the time, so we can help speed up that process when those people needing those services are in desperate need. So just speeds it up on our end for them. And currently all the funds we we get right now from fingerprinting, they just go into the general fund. So basically, that's what this stuff will do.
Thank you for your explanation, Chief Kerr. Are there any other questions? Member Mucci?
Thank you. Is this a brand new machine? I know at the early childhood task force, we heard that they found one somewhere that we were trying to get. Is this a brand new machine or did this come from somewhere else?
So I was offered a used machine, and the used machine does not meet the standard for the state. It does not meet the, there's a technical term, it didn't meet it. That's why they were willing to gift it off to someone. And so this one will be up to date. It's a plug and play unit, and every year there'll be a $1,800 service fee so that it stays remote access and they update it. And so we'll just have that reoccurring fee, which I mean, will easily be paid for by fingerprinting services, I bet.
Thank you.
Member Lynn?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in favor of this. I can't speak for all businesses, but I can talk to childcare in terms of the amount of time it takes to go through. So if this can speed that up and cut it in half, it's well worth it, particularly with the turnover we have in the industry, in the childcare industry. Thank you.
Okay, any other input? Member Fine Walsh?
Yeah, I don't think I'll be voting in favor of this. I can't help but look at this as a request for $100,000 from the police department between the 60 or 70,000 for the cameras and another 30 for the fingerprint. And I don't deny that there's perfectly good reasons to have a fingerprint device, a functional one and a modern one in your facility. But it seems to me that most of the benefit is going to be to the department, and the expense should come from the department's budget, not from ARPA funds. I think those monies should go to things that more broadly benefit the community. So I won't be supporting this.
Any other input? Well, I'll be voting for this. I think an improvement to, this service in Petersburg is worth the expenditure of these funds. So if there's no other input, will the clerk please call the roll on resolution 2022-12?
Thomas,
No.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob, David,
Yes.
Chelsea, Mark,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, resolution 2022-12 passes with a 5-1 vote with member Fine Walsh opposed. That brings us to the next resolution, 2022-13. This is a resolution approving the expenditure of $62,641.50 from the American Rescue Plan Special Revenue Fund 287 for Axon vehicle cameras. If approved, this resolution will approve purchase of 6 Axon vehicle camera systems using ARPA funds. Each system includes a dash camera and a back seat camera and will sync with the police department's Axon body cameras, which will provide more visual coverage of any incident or issue that the police are called out to. I'd entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
moved.
So not
Second.
hearing a motion. Pardon me?
It's
Is
been
there a
moved and
motion?
seconded.
Was there a motion and a second?
Yep.
Please do it again so he can hear you guys.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. The motion was made by member Mucci, seconded by member Tremblay. Audio's in and out, fluctuating up and down here. So any discussion? Member Fine Walsh.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate kind of the points I made earlier. I mean, I don't know, the police department budget in this town is roughly 20% of our overall budget. I think Sitka is around 15%. Sitka's schools are funded at a much higher rate than ours. And I think with the extra $200,000 that we gave to the police department on top of their budget, and this is on a budget where we went a little over, on the overall budget, in addition to the 30,000 that we've just agreed. I don't understand why, you know, with the budget they have, why is this not possible within their own budget? And also, I have a hard time believing that $70,000 cameras are, I mean, what kind of cameras are these? You know, is that necessary for this community? Is that the best way we can spend $70,000 that could potentially go to anyone else in the community? You know, there are a bunch of different ways we could use this. So I don't see the reason here. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Any other input by assembly members? Member Mucci.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I just want to know how the system works, and that'll be my first question. How does the system work?
So
Chief Kerr?
Yes, the camera system.
Yeah, whatever we're working
Yeah.
on right here.
Okay, so basically, we currently have in-car cameras that normally last the life of the vehicle, and that's about it. Then they're outdated and everything. These current cameras, this is to set it up, to install, to have their people come up here, install them, train our local maintenance people how to work on them, how to replace parts, how to keep them running beyond the life of the vehicle, and they can be moved from one vehicle to another. They will also provide video and audio coverage out in front of the vehicle. It will also do video and audio in the back seat as well. So anything that happens in the back seat will be covered. So you'll have the body camera, plus you'll have this synced up with that. Some of the benefits here with this is if there's some if you have a car on scene and the lights are on and someone else pulls up in their vehicle, once it gets within that range, it will automatically turn on that other vehicle's in-car camera system. So then it goes back 30 previous seconds. So it can capture an incident from multiple angles. The current body cameras will actually act as the microphone. So you have clear audio of anything that's happening. So you're not relying on the in-car audio. You'll have the body camera that will actually act as the mic. So you'll have crystal clear audio of the incident that's happening. It'll also allow you to play back multiple different angles at the same time. Right now, if you were to do it, you have to hit play on one and try and get them synced up. With the way Axon works, it's all synced together. You can watch it from 4 or 5 different angles all at the same time to get the perspective of what happens. It automatically uploads to evidence.com. So the borough's not having to store this stuff on site and use up our storage facilities. Evidence.com is a secure place. We get unlimited storage on there with the purchase of this. And it also allows for media releases. In case something was to happen, you want to get that body camera and that dash cam out at the same time so that you don't have problems. You can actually but you can actually clip out certain sections. And if there's people who were walking by or people not related, you can actually blur their faces and block stuff out. So, and it keeps a digital footprint of this. So you'll save that as a special clip while you still have the original that's unmodified and still 100% secure. Tracks who views it, how many times they view it. So you can hold people accountable if they're watching some sort of incident that they shouldn't be multiple times over again. You can actually hold that person accountable for it. You can say, why'd you watch this 8, 10 times? It's not for entertainment, it's for work. And so you can actually see how many times they view it. So.
And just a follow-up question, how much money do we have left in the local ARPA funds? Anybody rough idea?
Anybody in the room can answer that question?
Sure, I can. So most of the ARPA funds have been budgeted. There were $285,000 that had not been reserved yet for a special purpose but limited to the general fund. So after the fingerprinting machine is approved, If this was also approved, there would be $195,000 left unreserved.
The last question I had was, so how come this was not in the original budget request as we went through it earlier in the year? Is this a fund that we had extra money in, or why wasn't it originally budgeted?
Well, I'm sorry, so you're asking why was this not originally budgeted?
Yes.
Okay, similar to the digital fingerprinting, things change throughout the year and you have, the Axon body cameras or the Axon car cameras came about in some ways because of failures in our existing cameras. So as they go bad, we're trying to discuss how we want to deal with this. Do we want to order the old ones back again? Do we want to go a different direction? I asked Jim to look into it. And if I may, through the mayor, something that hasn't been talked about here is one of the biggest frustrations for police officers these days is the he said, she said finger pointing that can go on in an arrest situation. And the body cameras have already saved us in court. Car cameras do the same thing, which is, as Jim talked about, having a different angle on this where we can see what's going on. It really takes some of the heat off of police officers to try to remember exactly what happened or what was said in a situation that can be adrenaline soaked. This is the wave of the future. You want to be able to back your police officers up by having something that you can show, say, this is exactly what happened. It's not my memory. It's not your memory. This is what goes on. And having it all synced up makes it work a whole lot easier for everybody trying to review this. Now, not only the video, but the audio portion of it, you can hear what's said and what's seen. I think it's, just like the body cameras, that Petersburg was one of the first communities in this part of the world to implement those. And I don't know what we'd do without them. And I think, this is kind of what's going on in the future of law enforcement. You've got to come up with ways to protect your police officers, or you're going to have a hard time hiring them. Anyway, enough of my ranting, but.
Member Tremblay?
Thank you. I'm finding myself torn about this feels like a much more specific to a department request versus the community need for the fingerprinting. And so I'm just curious about you said the failure of the current cameras so I'm curious about what cameras come in vehicles and the status report. I believe you said, Chief, that we had cameras that come in the vehicles, but those are failing or they don't come with. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yes, so we have, I think, one working camera right now. We bought one with the latest or couple units back, and that one just turned out to be junk. That's the thing, is there's a lot of stuff that have hit the market. Not a lot of stuff stays true. With these, if a camera unit breaks, we'll be able to replace it and it'll still sync with everything. This is more of a long-term type thing instead of just a car specific type. Right now we buy vehicles without them, and the ones that we have been recycled through a couple different cars, and they're junk. They're not the high quality, up to date modern stuff. And this is one, Axon's been around for a long time. They have a proven track record. And like Steve said, it's what's happening nowadays in this work environment.
Thank you. I had a follow-up. Do body cameras still take audio if the officer is driving the vehicle?
Yes, it's normally right down in, you'll get the steering wheel when you're in the car. And then if you step out, you see a lot of the incidences where they'll show multiple angles of stuff. You won't see the officers. You won't see what's happening above. It covers out a certain area, but I mean, it'll allow more coverage is basically what it does, is because they work together. So it allows more coverage, more angles, so you can actually get the full picture of what's happening.
Thank you.
Member Fine Walsh?
Yeah, I'm still, you know, to Member Tremblay's point, I'm not hearing a reason why this is broadly beneficial to the community. You know, and a lot of things aside, you know, if a police department wants to update the cameras in its vehicles, and it doesn't sound like the cameras in these vehicles just magically stopped working all of a sudden. This is something that could have been planned for and budgeted. You know, that's one thing, but the fact that we're talking about paying for cameras so that, you know, as Steve said, we can go into this brave new future is downright dystopian. We're considering doing it with public money that we could be, you know, I mean, just a few sessions ago, somebody, was it Wave came asking for money, and we cut them down from 40 to 17 because we thought money was tight. Now we're talking about $70,000 so that we can have better cameras in our police cars. I mean, this is not the town we live in, you know. I don't see. Before anyone makes a decision on this, I hope they will consider the fact that we're talking about public money that could be used for anything else here, and we're choosing to use it for cameras for our police vehicles. It just doesn't make sense.
So
Um,
can I,
Member Lynn?
can I say something?
Hold on, Chief. Member Lynn? Did
Yes.
you want to speak?
I do. Looks to me like, if listening to this conversation, we have triple duplication here with these cameras, as I see it. And I'm not totally against the idea, but I think it needs more work. More thought process put into it in terms of what we want to do for the future. I didn't hear any questions answered of whether or not this is first generation, second generation, like computers. Are we going to turn them over overnight? Are we going to go? Where are we going in the future with this? And is there a different system that we should have that we don't have, the triple duplication? I think it needs a different, additional thought process. Maybe come back next year as part of the budget, but not right now. From my perspective, I can't go for it right now. Thank you.
Member Kinzinger?
I agree with Assembly Member Lynn. I'm not opposed to getting the cameras. I think they're a good long-term idea. I'm opposed to spending the ARPA funds for this. I think we need to have a plan for how we're spending the ARPA funds. It's kind of a one-time gift that I don't anticipate the borough getting much money like this in the future. And my preference would be to see it used for some things that we normally don't fund. The police we fund quite regularly every year, and I'd like to see this within the regular budget process. I would not be opposed if at a future meeting it was proposed as a supplemental to the budget, and that case could be made, but I'm not going to support it as long as it's taking ARPA funds. But to reiterate, I do support getting these cameras at some point in the future. But I'd like to see it come through the regular budget process or through a supplemental, and we can discuss it like that.
Any other comment by assembly members? You know, I'll be voting for this. I think this is a good expenditure of the money. If it saves us one lawsuit in an incident that accident or response to the police department, you house these cameras and it shows something that keeps us from getting into a lawsuit, it's going to be money well spent. And there was an issue with our cameras, body cameras, I believe, on one case that helped us out of that. So the best coverage we can have, I think, is important. So if there's no other input from assembly members, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Bob,
No.
Jeff,
No.
let me turn this down. Mark,
Yes.
Chelsea,
No.
David,
No.
Thomas,
Okay, the purchase of these Axon cameras fails with a 5-1 vote with Mayor Jensen supporting. Bring us to item D, Mountain View Manor Elderly Housing Director hire. Manager Giesbrick requests assembly approval to hire Michelle Lopez as the borough's Mountain View Manor Elderly Housing Director with a salary of $62,000 per year. This will be effective retroactive to September 1st, 2022. The borough is separating the elderly housing and assisted living departments of Mountain View Manor in anticipation of an agreement with Petersburg Medical Center to assume operations of the assisted living facility. There are various sections of Borough Code that will need to be amended as well to separate the two departments. There is a suggested motion here, so I'd entertain a motion to use that if someone so desires.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the hiring of Michelle Lopez in the position of Mountain View Manor Elderly Housing Director and request Manager Giesbrecht draft ordinances to amend Borough Code to facilitate the separation of the elderly housing and assisted living departments of the Mountain View Manor facility.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by member Lynn with a second by member Tremblay. Discussion.
Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Yes, Manager Giesbrecht.
so to answer some of the earlier questions, the hospital and the borough have been meeting and to talk about moving in that direction. And it's going well. There's a lot of details and it's going to take some time for those details to be worked out. One of the issues is the hospital really has no interest in elderly housing. That's just not in their world. So we're kind of having to go out on a limb and say, we've got to split it apart so that we can move towards assisted living, going towards the hospital and get all those questions answered so that will work. At the same time, we have a whole elderly housing operation that has to keep running well. Michelle's done an amazing job up there in supporting Sheilin as key, and in many ways, it's been this way for a while where Michelle handles elderly housing as well as backing up Sheilin on paperwork side of assisted living. We have a new director at assisted living now, and that job is really more, it's a huge job. So having elderly housing thrown into the mix probably didn't make a whole lot of sense to begin with anyway. So this would split the two up and give us a chance to keep moving forward with the hospital on the plans. Michelle deserves, the director title for elderly housing. She's been doing the job in many ways. She's also agreed to continue to help us support Derek in the interim. So we're not going to be replacing her position in assisted living until such time as we get a deal done with the hospital or not, and then we rethink everything. But I think this is the right move to make for her and for the department and keeps that going. And again, she's graciously continues to offer support for Derek and getting him up to speed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Member Lynn.
Yes, thank you. I agree. I think Michelle has done a wonderful job up there backing up everybody. And I think that increase in salary, I think there's a slight increase here with it. I think it's deserved. And so we're not adding another body, we're just simply increasing it. So and I think that this recognition we really need to go forward with.
Okay, if there's no other input from assembly, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Chelsea, Thomas,
Yes.
Bob.
Okay, the hire of Michelle Lopez in that position, Mountain View Manor Elderly Housing Director has been approved by the assembly. That brings us to item E, Pappy's Landing Marine Facility Improvements Conceptual Plans. This is version 2. Assembly members Kinser and Lynn worked with Horion Associates and several interested parties to revise the first version of plans to make improvements to the Pappy's Landing Marine Facility. Approval of this version of the conceptual plans is requested. I'd entertain a motion to approve this version of the plans.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by member Kinsinger, seconded by member Lynn. Discussion. Member Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we could, we received quite a few comments, and if I could have, or if the manager would be willing to walk through, we've taken a lot of comments in consideration in those interim designs, but if he would address, how it was, what was approached and what was done, I would appreciate it.
Through the mayor. So we first met with some of the harbor board members, and Glo was involved, and that was more of a trying to make sure the harbor was aware of the direction we're going in. They quickly said, this is kind of up to the assembly and the users of PAPIs, and we moved in that direction. Assembly members Lynn and Kinzinger and Alan Murph, as our resident engineer, started working on ideas, and then they took comments from the public and users out there as far as what's needed to make PAPIs a facility that the borough could be proud of, would meet a lot of the needs. One of the things that I cautioned everybody is everybody is afraid of doing too much. At the same time, we want a facility that meets the needs. The purpose of this is to basically, for me to be able to go on record with AD&R that the assembly has said, we've got a plan. Doesn't mean that there won't be 5 other conceptual drawings at some point and that the plan will get changed. But before we can go about getting ownership of the land, the assembly has to say, you're okay with continuing in this direction. Clearly the plan as developed and what's in front of the assembly is a pretty big deal. It's probably, it's got a lot of features in it that we'd love to have, but may not happen, at least short term. This is not a project that the borough has cash in hand ready to do. This is clearly one that'll have to be, we'll have to search for grant opportunities and earmarks or whatever, maximize the use of the harbor grant program at the state. And so having a conceptual drawing that the assembly agrees with allows us to start down that process. As we move down that process, you'll likely have to see changes to this, and we'll have to come back to the assembly and get more engineering money, I suppose, to make future changes. But the first step is this allows me to talk to AD&R and get permission, start an application for the borough to get ownership of the land out there, which then leads to DOT giving us the ownership of the dock itself. So that's kind of the quick story. And as I said to both Dave and Bob, the maintenance side, in other words, what do we do to keep it afloat? That's a different thing. This is not taking away from doing maintenance. This is laying out what we want this thing to look like in the future someday. What we're going to have to do maintenance wise is still to come. We're going to have a conversation, and likely I'll be back in front of the assembly to ask Alan to lay out, what, from an engineering perspective, what are the things we could do that would last the longest right now before we can find grant money to fund the whole thing. And then you have the whole issue of it's outside service area 1. We'll have to kind of struggle with some of that. But it's as designed, it would be a really great addition to the borough's stuff, but it's going to be expensive. It'll be expensive to maintain. So we have to work through those issues. But again, first step is we got to get ownership of the land out there, and this is required by DNR. So, hope I answered your question.
Tremblay.
Thank you. I'd like to thank members Lynn and Kinzinger for their work as part of the team on this, and Manager Giesbrecht for bringing it forward. What I'm hearing is, don't freak out. This isn't absolutely going to happen. Just that we had to have a plan to go forward to try to get ownership. And so if people do see this and have big thoughts on it as a conceptual plan, and we've closed a formal comment time, should we ask people to write their stuff down to be ready for future time? Or are we still, what would you advise the public on hearing all of this?
Sure,
Yeah.
through the mayor, I don't want to take away from, Bob and Dave, and they're kind of heading this up. So, but I'll tell you what I think. How's that?
Yeah.
Which is, I think we should continue to take comments. And those should be stockpiled in a way that, again, we don't have the money for this. I mean, the money's not in the general fund or in the harbor fund to do this. This is going to take a large grant or a combination of grants. And we're probably going to have to do it a piece at a time. Work on the uplands, get the parking squared away, work on the dock. And we haven't even talked about how to phase any of that in yet. So yes, this is a way to start the process. Yes, I think the communications should continue as long as Assembly members Kinzinger and Lynn think that's the way they'd like to go. And, you know, it all has to keep coming back to the assembly because this is not a project that's gonna happen tomorrow. It's gonna take some time.
Thank you.
Member Bucci.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Do we have any idea how much we spent on engineering to get it at this point to where we are?
I think what was it, 32,000 was the original assembly and that's it. Alan Murph agreed to do 2 revisions and this is the second
Okay.
under that initial.
And then just to follow up, so that with this revised plan, we're looking at $9.2 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Member Kinsinger.
Yes, what I want to emphasize to anybody that looks at this plan is we tried to figure out a plan that could be phased. I think everybody realizes we're not going to turn around and see this out of Papke's next year, although I wouldn't mind it. And the way it's also set up, and Alan did a really good job on the second revision, I feel, is that there's different pots of money for different parts of the facility out there. So each one of those would come in front of the assembly. We would be able to talk about it and decide whether this is what we want to do. So I think I just want to reiterate what Steve said. This is just kind of getting a placeholder, saying that the borough has intentions of upgrading Papke's, and all the final details and what it looks like will remain to be seen.
Member Lynn.
Yeah, I want to thank them. We had at least three or four different, what I'll call back of the envelope drawings that people from town and out the way have given us, which we passed on to Alan, which came up with this. Also, our harbor master had, I think, some very good ideas that are, I mean, they made major sense. One of the ideas behind that was hopefully that you could begin to transfer a little bit of the traffic that's in town here on the one ramp to that. And that was some of the thought process, I think, that kind of went into this. So I thank all those people who really, you know, sent those comments and did that to come to where we are now. Thank you.
Any other comments? You know, I appreciate the work that everybody's done on this. I agree that Papke's is a important facility for Petersburg to have that maintained. When the first conceptual drawing or plans came out, I believe it was in the $6 million range. And then when we had public comment, which we haven't had on this conceptual drawing yet, which is one of the reasons I'm not going to support this, or it hasn't been vetted by the harbor board. I feel that's the harbor board's response, you know, one of their duties or tasks is when you have a harbor infrastructure that's going to be built in town, you would have them, you know, review it at the harbor board. And now we're looking at a $9.2 million facility potentially. I could agree with some of it, more parking and 2 ramps. I think that would be a great idea, but I can't, without this being scrutinized by the public and vetted by the harbor board, I can't support it at this time. I totally agree that we need a facility of some type at Papke's Landing. Any other comments? Clerk, call the roll.
Bob,
Yes.
Mark,
No.
David,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, this approving this conceptual design passes with a 5-1 vote with Mayor Jensen opposed. That brings us to the next item on our agenda this evening, and that's F, Public Works Vector Truck Replacement. Public Works Director Cotta requests approval to purchase an International 2100i Vector truck from Yukon Equipment Incorporated of Anchorage for a cost of $471,229.40. The fiscal year 2023 budget approved budget, the budget in 2023 has this expenditure up to $480,000 in it. So I'd entertain a motion to approve this purchase.
So moved. Second.
Motion been made by Member Bucci, seconded by Member Lynn. Discussion. Is Mr. Cotta in the room, Manager Giesbrecht? Chris,
Yes,
how
sir.
old is the other truck? And I mean, I've seen it in action before, and was cleaning manholes out and stuff, and it sounds like it's sucking up some pretty aggressive materials that could wear the machine out. Is the old machine in pretty tough shape?
Yes, it is. The current unit is a 2001. When it was purchased, it was given a 15-year service life. So we originally looked at replacing this truck back in 2014. At that time, it was found to be in pretty good condition, and it's been extended a couple of times since then. But at present, it's starting to show a lot of signs of its age. It's got, well, just for example, the rear main seal, the engine is leaking, transmission has a leak, the power steering's leaking, the main hydraulic pump is leaking, the body has a lot of rust on it. And so given the age of the truck and the accumulating issues that it's having, coupled with the fact that it's a very critical truck in our fleet, we decided to go ahead and recommend replacement. It's a long lead time item, so probably a year after we order it. So hopefully the current truck will keep, be able to keep in service during that time. And it's as I said before, it's a pretty critical truck for our fleet. We do a lot of different operations with this truck. As far as I know, it's the only piece of equipment on the island that can pressure clean sewer mains. So that's part of its job. We do a lot of vacuum excavation with the truck. Anytime there's a water break or a sewer break, when you're digging down to infrastructure, it's a lot easier on the infrastructure if you vacuum excavate around it instead of trying to probe with a bucket or hand shovel. You can just pull the material away, and it's makes for less damage and more effective and faster repairs. So yeah, did I answer all of your questions, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. And it sounds like the old vehicle's been kept in service longer than expected. So hopefully this one lasts a year. Any other input on the new Vector truck purchase? Seeing none, will the clerk call the roll?
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Chelsea.
Yes.
Okay, we have approved the purchase of a new Vector truck. Item G on the agenda tonight, or this afternoon, your time. Housing Task Force direction. The Assembly held a work session to discuss direction on a focus for the future Housing Task Force. The direction discussed was as follows, and this was noted by Assembly Member Tremblay. Number one, crisis housing, both immediate and longer term housing first models, development code review finalization with goal of bringing to the Assembly, exploring financial resources such as the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation for both institutional and individual support, infrastructure review comparing upcoming planned infrastructure projects with potential housing plans, exploring ideas and programs currently underway in other communities in Southeast Alaska, and reviewing borough tax policy for incentive program ideas. Item 7, identifying burdensome state level regulations. So I guess what we're looking for here is to approve this as the initial direction for this task force, and we will be voting to fill this task force October 3rd, I believe, if I remember earlier in the meeting we discussed that. So do I have a motion to approve this for the task force? Is that what we're after here? This isn't a discussion item, it's an action item, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Mr.
So moved.
Okay, so any discussion on this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Member Lynn?
Yeah, the item 2, and first of all, let me back up, is that I listened to the audio on this, and the comments and questions were so far across the board. I commend Member Tremblay for trying to put something together that would put some cohesion to it. But I have, number 2 is the one that, when I listened to the audio and I think there's a need for, and to look at our code and code zoning and code revisions. I totally agree with that. But rather than come to us, I would suggest we make a change to that. And that any of those changes and proposed suggested changes, et cetera, go to our planning and zoning first, because we have to see how it goes into our existing code. And maybe they have better ideas even to put on top of that is what I would propose, some wording changes on that. And so I have an idea, and I'm just going to throw it out here. Suggestions for planning and zoning code review and suggestions will be forwarded to the planning and zoning board from the task force. I think it needs to go there before it comes to us.
Member Kinsinger?
Mr. Mayor, I served on planning and zoning for, 6 years. And 3 years of that time, we did exactly that. We looked at a complete review of the zoning code. And it was a very exhaustive process, and it went step by step through the entire code. So I really feel that process has been completed. I mean, there's not to say that there can't be more revisions to it and that planning and zoning might have some more input into it. But I hate to see that body of work thrown out and start all over again, because it is indeed a huge task. What I'd prefer to see is that planning and zoning be active participants in this housing task force, either through the delegation of their chair as sitting on this, and that we work with planning and zoning together on the task force direction. Because there's not a lot of things that a borough can do to all of a sudden make housing appear in town. It's really, my view is, it's up to private industry and private citizens to provide the housing in the community. The things that we can do as a borough, though, are address the code, incentives through tax policy, and make borough land available. So that's where I see planning and zoning be an integral part in this. And they need to be participating and at the table as much as the assembly is in this entire process. But I don't want to see us start all over again. And I would like to reiterate that this body has approved revision of the code already. It happened a couple of years ago. What we need to do is we need to work on approving the map. And that's not a simple task, because there's quite a bit of controversy involved in that. And I think it needs to be better explained. And I think we need to take another run at that instead of starting all over from scratch on redoing the entire zone again. And we just approved part of that code that was approved originally again tonight.
Any other input? Member Tremblay?
Thank you. I'm trying to put a revision based on the comments both already said together out loud. So a proposed amendment to the motion on item 2 would be development code review in partnership with planning and zoning with goal of bringing to the assembly. This would formalize, so I'll stop. That's my motion to amend that to remove the word finalization, because as Member Kinsinger pointed out, it formally has been passed, but this would put planning and zoning code review with planning and zoning with goal of bringing to the assembly is my formal amendment. Looking for a second.
You know, is there a second to that proposed amendment? And I would just want to interject something. I mean, we have to give the task force some direction on what we'd like to see them come up with. I don't know how many people we have that have volunteered to be on this task force. When I left town a few days ago, it was 4. We're looking to fill a lot of different, hopefully people from different aspects of the community. Do we need to have a direction as detailed as we're working on here this evening, or just I mean, it's probably gonna morph and change as this committee starts coming up with ideas, isn't it? I mean, that's just my thought. What's the assembly think? Like, remember Lynn?
Now, I'm fairly close to where you were at, is that we were looking for different ideas, and I'm not looking to approve that. But if that task force comes up with ideas that are different from where we currently are, or even where it was approved, I think that needs to go back, and we need to relook at some of that. So what I'm trying to do is not cut out, not cut out what's already, but if there's other ideas or changes that make a heck of a lot of sense, I think we ought to allow that process through the task force to take place and then come back through planning. That's where I'm at, is that don't cut off any kind of ideas that might come forward. That's where I'm at.
Member Murchie?
Yeah, thank you. I just, I agree with Bob. I think we just need to have a rough parameter on what we'd like them to look at. If they, if there are issues that planning and zoning needs to deal with, I'm sure this group would kick them down to planning and zoning and get some input from them. But I think by leaving them, having a list of things we want them to look at, but the group that was at that housing task force, they asked some very interesting questions. And I think we need to kind of, once we fill it, let them run with it for a little bit and see what they can come up with. And I don't think we want to hem them in too much. I think we want it to be pretty fluid. So yeah, I think this is a good start. I'll be voting in support of this.
I have a question, excuse me, Member Kinsinger. I have a question for the clerk. Do we have any more people that have expressed interest in the last 3-4 days, Clerk Thompson?
I believe I have at least one, maybe two in my email that I have not yet printed.
Oh, good. So, we're getting more interest. And I suppose we might have to extend the deadline for people of interest. We could form the task force potentially with the people we have interested in October 3rd and then add to that list as time goes on. I mean, I don't know how soon we're going to get a firm plan here, but does that make sense, Member Tremblay, to you, just to give them a general guideline? Or, I mean, I'd hate to, jump in the middle of your ideas.
Yes, so the question at hand is on the 7 points that came out of the work session, whether or not to pass, that's what's currently under discussion. And for background, this came out of my experience with I was taking notes and listening during the work session with my role as current chair of Early Childhood Education Task Force in mind. We were given 8 points, basically similar to these, that the assembly passed from Member Lynn, and they have been pretty crucial kind of architectural frameworks for us as we have done our work. Because as anyone who looks back, and anyone can go listen to that work session, a lot of stuff comes up, right? That's a big thorny topic. And so having just a few parameters to work within to keep discussion flowing productively forward is helpful. So that's where the 7 came up from. And so if we don't want to get specific about where planning and zoning would fit into that conversation, I completely understand, but I think we all know that these topics will bring them in no matter what. I'm hoping planning and zoning members are interested in joining the task force formally, but I understand if they're kept busy enough as it is. So it'll just be interesting to see how those combine. So I'm excited to hear all the ideas that come out of this. So, yeah.
Okay, so back to where we were. Well, the motion on the table is to approve these 7 bullet points, or for this boilerplate plan that we have. And Member Tremblay made a motion, and there was no second to that motion, I believe. Is there anybody who wants to make a second to that, or just leave the list as it is and then move forward to vote on what was
I can
originally?
rescind the amendment. So we're back to the 7 points with no changes.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? The clerk, call the roll.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Jeff, Mark,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Okay, let me find where I'm at here. The communications, I believe, is where we're at, and we've had a few communications since our last meeting, and as normal, we don't read them, but if you person is interested to see what communications the Borough Assembly has received, you can go on the website and they're listed there. Item 18, assembly discussion items. Assembly member comments. Is there any comments by assembly members? Member Tremblay.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I'm hoping to schedule the long-awaited meeting with Juneau representatives regarding early childhood education incentive program for childcare workers. It's a meeting that we approved as an assembly a long time ago. And so there are so many moving parts. There's no way I could have tried to bring it to I can't crowdsource the scheduling of this. So I'm going to work with Steve to schedule it, and we will notify people when it's being scheduled. I'm hoping it can be a joint meeting between interested assembly members and early childhood education task force members. I'm also hoping to have an update for the assembly on the status of the task force in our meetings this summer at the next meeting. And so that'll kind of all be a part of it. So if you are really, really interested in that conversation and you have hard dates about what you cannot or can do, maybe reach out to, we can use Debbie and Steve as intermediaries on that front. But again, it's a meeting we've already voted to pass, so it wasn't an action item or much discussion, but just a heads up that ready to get things moving. So thank you.
Any other assembly members have comments today? Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you. With the election coming up in October, will the borough be doing any kind of informational updates for members of the public about the 4 propositions that we had? I've had a couple calls related to the first proposition that we're voting on. And is the borough planning to do something either in the newspaper or at the radio station ahead of the elections for those things?
Not necessarily, Member Mucci, where we aren't really supposed to like push any of the whatever they're called, sorry, propositions. If anyone has questions about them, or they can certainly give us a call. But it's just basically, changing charter. And so if they have questions about that process or what the charter says currently and they don't know how to look, I can certainly help.
Thank you.
Any other assembly members have comments this afternoon? Okay, seeing none. Recognitions, are there any recognitions? Member Kinsinger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. At our last meeting, the Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department gave a presentation and also alerted us to some issues. And one of them seemed to be that we don't recognize them enough. And I think everybody here can say that, thank you very much to everybody that volunteers. When your house is burning down, if you're having a heart attack, you want somebody there to be able to respond. And I was provided a list of some of the businesses in town that allow their employees to leave for call-outs. And this is really important because it makes it easy for somebody to volunteer. Because if you're at a job and you get a call out and you can't go, well, guess what? Somebody like me might be having to lay on the side of the street for a long time. So I'd just like to list a few businesses that currently do this. This is not a complete list, and I might be missing some of them. But Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Bird Construction, Fortuna Contracting, Homeport Electronics, J&M Enterprises, Joy Jansen Clinic, the Legislative Information Office, National Marine Fisheries Services, Norheim Incorporated, Petersburg Medical Center, the business office, Petersburg Motors, Petersburg Pilot, Petrol Marine, Piston and Rudder Services Incorporated, Rockies Marine, United States Forest Service, Viking Travel, Wave, and Synthesis Fabrication. So once again, thank you for all these businesses for allowing your employees to participate in call-outs.
Thank you for that recognition, Member Kensinger. Well deserved. Any other recognitions by assembly members? Member Tremblay.
Thank you. As we're wrapping up summer, I wanted to pass along comments that I've heard from visitors to town on the restrooms that we provide in the parking lot. Quote, "Those were the cleanest and nicest restrooms I have ever used in my life." So, they may seem silly to people that have not needed to use them, but they have made a big difference for local businesses established downtown, and for the visitors being able to experience town and to stay in town. Oftentimes people would in past times have taken shuttles back to boats rather than search for those kinds of facilities in town. So helps keep people visiting stores while they're here. So thank you to everybody involved for making those happen.
Any other recognitions by assembly members? Any staff in the room have recognitions today? I can't see that way, but just speak if you do. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.